Okay, so we are now recording lecture 4. Lecture 4 is a long lecture, but it's a very useful lecture. So, HIPAA has three types of safeguards that are, says there are three types of safeguards that are essential. One is administrative safeguard, where you want the right type of person to access the system. Security training, developing policies, procedures, all those things are very much essential. And you have technical safeguards, for example, automated processes that limit who's able to do within the system, etc. And then you have physical safeguards and mechanisms to put into place that the equipment and data is associated with EHR. For example, you don't want to have the server sitting in the hallway. You want the server that has the patient data sitting in a locked, safe room, right? Administrative safeguards touch upon the idea of data governance and information governance that we discussed in lecture 3. So security controls are very important when it comes to accessing patient data. Here we have the example of the biometric device which identifies or authenticates a particular person before providing access to that person to patient data. So all storage devices where you store electronic data have to be encrypted using proper encryption. Let me give you an example. There was once a doctor who used to store all patient data on his local computer. Somebody figured that out. One fine morning he comes to work, starts his computer, the computer doesn't boot properly. Turns out the hard drive is gone. And it also is registered that the hard drive had patient data. Needless to say, the doctor lost his job because of violation of HIPAA. So security controls are extremely important. Encryption is one of them. Also, when you use rack servers, you got to put them in a rack, properly lock them up. That's very important. Don't keep the rack server in the hallway, right? Nobody does that. Okay, so let's touch upon this important topic of public key encryption. Public key encryption is a very important topic that I usually ask questions on this in the midterm exam, final exam, quizzes, etc. So there are two main types of encryption. One is symmetric, the other one is asymmetric. Public key encryption uses asymmetric. So what is the difference between symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption? In symmetric encryption, you use a reverse mathematical function to get the plain text from the ciphertext. For example, if you use encrypt data or if you encrypt data using addition, you decrypt it using subtraction. If you encrypt data using multiplication, you decrypt it using division. So you use a reverse mathematical function to receive the plain text from the ciphertext. However, in asymmetric key encryption, this doesn't happen. For example, in public key encryption, the reverse mathematical function is not used because you have two different keys. One is a public key to encrypt the data, and the private key is used to decrypt the data. Symmetric key encryption uses the idea that if I have a key to open my door of my home, I could use the same key to lock that door, right? So this is the concept that is used by symmetric key encryption. If you multiply something by 3 to receive the ciphertext, you divide the same thing by 3 to receive the plain text back. So the key is the same, although the function may be different in symmetric key encryption. But in asymmetric key encryption, use a different key for encryption and a different key for decryption, which makes it stronger. and not very easily hackable system, you know. So that's the key, power of public key encryption, which is a stronger form of encryption. So firewalls are used to examine the incoming traffic so that some unauthorized or unauthenticated incoming traffic is not getting to the network. You can watch this video on firewalls. There could be a hardware firewall, where your hardware device is used as a firewall between your network and the internet, or that could be a software firewall, where a software device could be used between the, or a computer can run a software that serves as a firewall. All right, so firewalls could be between different LANs or data centers here, between different campuses and all those things. So how do firewalls work? They examine the incoming traffic, and you know, if the incoming traffic has or the incoming packet has an IP address, which is not an IP address that belongs to the destination network, then the firewall disallows that particular packet from getting into the network. So that's how firewalls work. Okay, skip this. So this leads to the idea of IP spoofing. In IP spoofing, what the hacker does is he or she figures out the possible source addresses and puts the source address on the packet so that the packet could easily pass through the firewall. So IP spoofing is one of the techniques used by malicious crackers to get a packet into the network. So problems originating from a firewall could be firewall can constitute a bottleneck, can reduce your speed of traffic, etc., etc. They can could be like they concentrate security in one spot. Maybe the traffic coming through the firewall is secure, but then there are other ways of getting into the network. But there has to be some security, right? All right. So now we move on to a very interesting topic of designing a secure system. And I always love to ask questions on this topic in the quizzes, midterm exam, and final exams. Let me start off by talking about the Winchester house. I'm sure you guys have heard about the Winchester rifle, right? During the 19th century, this rifle was very famous. And because so many people were killed because of this Winchester rifle, the lady who owned the Winchester Rifle Company and the house was told that if she keeps adding more and more units to their home, then, you know, maybe she may be relieved from a curse or something like that. So she kept adding units to her house, adding more and more, constructs to the Winchester house, thereby expanding it every year. As a consequence, it was a poorly designed building where you could get in through different methods, and it became a whole, you need so many security guards to, really secure this place. I used to work for a hospital a long time ago, and I was told during orientation that there are 110 plus ways of getting into the hospital. And it was a huge security risk because they kept adding buildings and they kept connecting buildings using bridges. So a different story. So information security encompasses two things: application security and infrastructure security. So your application should have security features incorporated into it, and the infrastructure, the server and the hardware should also have security features incorporated into it. So that's the difference between application security and infrastructure security. So some of the important activities of security engineering is user and permission management. You want to make sure that the right person is getting access to patient data, system software deployment and maintenance, trying to figure out the vulnerabilities, and I'm going to talk more about this as we go on. Attack monitoring. Let's say attack has already happened. How do you monitor whether the attack has happened or not? And then, you detect the attack and recover from the attack. So that's important. So these are some of the security concepts. Asset. Asset is a system resource that has a value that needs to be protected. For example, the database that has patient data is an asset, right? Exposure is a possible loss or harm that could result from a successful attack. Loss of reputation of an organization after some of its data is stolen is an exposure example. Vulnerability is a weakness in a computer-based system that may be exploited to cause loss or harm. For example, a weak password can be easily cracked, right? An attack is an exploitation of a system's vulnerability. Impersonation of an authorized user is an attack. So these days we use a lot of strong passwords. You need to have special characters and all that. In the past, when passwords were first put into place, someone would try to guess another person's password by entering the child's name or the wife's name or the husband's name of that person. Things like that. And that led to the idea of having strong passwords. Don't use dictionary words because dictionary words could be tried by the hacking systems. Threats are circumstances that have potential to cause loss or harm. Example of a threat is the potential of an unauthorized user gaining control to the system. Control is a protective measure that reduces the system's vulnerability, for example, having a strong password. There are some types of security threats. The first three types that we are going to discuss is confidentiality threat. It involves disclosure of information to people or programs, right? If a particular rock star is suffering from a particular disease, if that intruder figures out that, hey, this rock star is going to this hospital, cracks into the system, gets the information and delivers or sells that information to the media for a few $1 million, if not thousands, then what happens? The reputation of the hospital is gone, right? People get to know, oh, if I go to this hospital, people can have access to my health data. Integrity threat is someone getting in, deleting some patient records, or a diabetic patient's record is entered, and this intruder goes in and changes the information that the person has no diabetes, on the contrary, has some disease that the patient does not have. That's integrity threat. Availability threat is these threats that can restrict access to the software or its data for authorized users. Like someone gets into my account and changes the password. That's availability threat. So controls are intended to ensure that attacks are unsuccessful. It can be intended to detect or repel the attacks, and it can also support recovery. So security risk management is a big field, and there are a lot of companies that make lots of money just by advising healthcare facilities on having secure data and secure IT and those type of things. There are two stages of risk management. Preliminary risk management, identifying what kind of software, hardware, middleware is used and what kind of risk is involved in using this. Then you have lifecycle risk management, where during system development you identify the loopholes in the system and where things can be insecure and all. So some of the things you need to do during risk assessment is asset identification, find out what assets are involved, asset value assessment, exposure assessment is assess potential loss associated with each asset. You have feasibility assessment, assessment of technical feasibility and costs that are made. You might want to buy a highly secure system, but it's not feasible because it slows down your system, or it reduces the usability of the system. Then you have security requirements definition. You identify a list of security requirements and you execute them, which also involves designing the system for security. You want to develop a secure system when you build the very architecture of the system. Like for example, you don't want to build a Winchester house where you keep adding things and things become keep adding units and overall system becomes insecure. You want to plan in advance. Good practices need to be employed while designing a secure system. For example, the system does not take weak passwords. Proper authentication is done at all for all operations that are performed within the system. And design for development. You got to keep in mind that the system is not going to remain as it is. It should be scalable, and when you scale the system should not become insecure. So architecture, design, security involves protection. How should the system be organized so that critical assets can be protected against external attacks? And distribution of assets, that's very important. You don't want to put all the eggs in one basket, right? Not a good idea, because if the basket is stolen or if the basket is destroyed, all the eggs are gone. So that's very important. So here are the basic guidelines for designing a secure system. Base security decisions on an explicit security policy. Develop the policy for security. And that gets into the idea of data governance, which we discussed in lecture 3. Who's supposed to access what part of the data? How do you authorize or authenticate that particular individual? All those things. Avoid a single point of failure. So if there is one gate that is broken, and once you break the gate, the enemy can get in, then it's not a good situation, right? I used to study Roman history a lot, especially the medieval history. And during medieval times, to get into the fort, they would have a first layer of wall and a gate associated. If you break into that wall, then you would have to cross a stream. It was very difficult to cross a stream. And then there would be second wall. And if you cross the stream, get into the second wall, then there would be another security wall. And then there would be a tower where the knights would live and the lord, or the big people in the medieval period would live. So there was no single point of failure. So that's very important. Not to have single point of failure, to have dual authentication and those type of things. So if a failure happens, the failure has to happen securely. For example, someone hacks in, steals the data, gets all the information, and destroys all the data. If you don't have backup data, then you are in deep trouble. But if you have backup data, and you can replace backup site into a primary site, as we discussed in one of the previous lectures. That's one example. The other example is someone manages to steal the data, like someone managed to steal the hardware or the hard drive of that particular doctor. If that doctor had encrypted the hard drive that had patient data, then even if the hard drive is stolen, we are assuming that whoever has stolen the hard drive cannot actually get any information out of it. That's another example for failing securely. Let me relate one example with that respect. Long time ago, I was working as the chief of IT for a particular department of a particular hospital, and at that time, we used to use compact discs to install software, and one day I was doing something, one of my compact discs was stolen. And I was thinking, what did I do? I mean, I should be more careful. And this didn't have patient data. It was a compact disk that had some installation software, like Microsoft Office or one of those. And then I figured out that whoever has stolen this disk is going to return it back to me, because there's a password associated, and this person does not have that password. And lo and behold, 3 days later, this one individual, she returned the compact disk back to me, and she told me that, oh, you left the disk here, and I found it. I said, okay, thank you very much. So that's called failing securely. So you got to balance security and usability. As developers, if you add more and more security features, it might end up that the system is no longer usable. So you got to think about that. Beware of social engineering. People trying to talk you into the password, trying to talk you into getting information, or someone pretending to be some authentic person. That person is not authentic. We have people, they call tiger teams. They try to hack into the system to see where the failure lies in the system. Okay, use redundancy and diversity to reduce risk, which is have multiple copies, horizontal fragmentation, vertical fragmentation, as I discussed in the last lecture. Those things are very important. Validate all inputs, getting into the system. Compartmentalization of assets, very, very important. As I said, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? So if you are using patient data, if you're storing patient data, divide them horizontally, vertically. Vertically is better than horizontal. So that's very important. Design for deployment. Minimize default privileges. Long time ago, I'm talking about like 20 years ago, when I was an undergraduate student in computer science, we were trained in databases using Oracle, and the username used to be Scott and the password used to be Tiger, because it turns out that whoever programmed the system, his name was Scott, first name was Scott, and he had a pet dog named Tiger. So his the username was Scott by default and the password was Tiger, and we had to change the password. But for students, they didn't care, they kept the same username and password. So always minimize default privileges, force people to change the password and username when they start using the system. designed for recoverability. We have discussed this over and over again. If there's a failure, the failure must happen securely. All right, so I'll let you watch this video on wireless network security. We did discuss about the rogue detector in the last lecture, so I'm going to skip this. Skip some of this. All right. So for wireless networks, you need to change default passwords. The thing that identifies the wireless network is the SSID. You could install firewalls, antivirus software, encrypt the data within the network. That's very important. Okay. We're talking about the same thing again and again. Change the default password. Restrict access, right? You don't want to have an insecure network. And you don't want to access patient data or transmit patient data using an insecure network. Encrypt the data using your network. WPA is more effective than WEP. This could be one of the questions that may be asked in your midterm exam. So keep that in mind. So SSID is the identifier that identifies your local network. So the manufacturer has a written-in SSID, which is a default SSID, and then you can change the name of your network to something else. So here's an example of SSID, and here the SSID is known. So I'm going to skip this. Protecting the SSID is avoiding publicizing about your SSID is important. So I want to skip this since we've spoken about firewalls many times. So these are the videos you could watch, and I hope you like this lecture. I'm sorry it was a bit long, but I hope it was of use to you.